Pavel arrived at the railway station in the company of Natasha Fatoussi, but soon lost her amid the homebound holidaymakers waiting for their luggage to be weighed and registered at the Dépôt de Bagages. The problem was that the crowd had spilled over the concourse and was occupying the space in front of the pasted timetables, which he liked to consult before committing himself to a particular platform. As a result, he was almost the last to board and ended up in the carriage nearest the engine, wedged into a window corner by a woman twice as wide as himself, as though put there to cook a gap. Immediately the last doors had slammed, the two bugle notes sounded above the indignant huffing of the locomotive. The train creaked and swayed and eventually began to move. As it gathered momentum, he rested his weary head against the glass and stared through a lacy veil of filth at the ships in the Vauban basin, presently replaced by a woman hanging washing in the Tuesday afternoon suburbs, and soon afterwards cabbage fields, apple orchards, and open country. And so another town slides into the past and dissolves into memories, he thought, and sighed, self-pityingly. He took his volume of René Descartes' Meditations from his portmanteau, but rested it on his knee unopened. Although this volume demonstrated the immortality of the soul and the existence of God, neither of these useful entities promised much consolation for a heart stained with his peculiar melancholy. That is, a compound of homesickness, travel sickness, and the feeling of metaphysical guilt that accompanies a severe hangover. Instead, he continued to gaze at the trim fields and the tight-packed villages as they came and went in clouds of sunlit smoke, a sight that became, after a time, entirely dreamlike, as green corn and clover cuttings blended with southern woodland and roaring plunges into subterranea. After half an hour or so, he glanced furtively at his fellow travellers. From the way they tilted their heads backwards or forwards, and from the lack of conversation among them, he deduced that they were as poisoned by pleasure as he. After a while, the further thought occurred that he remembered the pince nez that was sitting a night's move away on the opposite bench. It was one of those journalists he had met the previous evening at that ludicrous play. Once he felt this proposition confirmed, he looked away and grew fearful that the man might take it into his head to address him. Indeed, that he would force him to take up one end of a lengthy conversation that their carriage mates would have no choice but to audit, with irritation and silent contempt for whatever opinions might be expressed. A couple of hours earlier, while waiting for Madame Fatoussi's trunk to be conveyed to the fiacre, Pavel had wandered into the Hotel Casino's first-floor boutique, where he had bought a tweed cap with adjustable ear flaps. He now lowered these appendages and pulled the contraption's stiff felt bill over his eyes, as he was unable to see anything but his own knees. It is, of course, impossible to sleep on a French train. The racket from the engine, the driver's imbecilic delight in the noise of his steam whistle, and the jolting transmitted directly from track to traveller by the minimally upholstered second-class seating, combined to deny the slightest possibility of repose. Nevertheless, it is certainly easier for a man to gather his thoughts once he has retired to the privacy of his hat, and that is what Pavel did. What came to his mind first was the extraordinary appearance of Natasha Fatoussi when he found her in the salon early that morning. After their inferred night of passion, she had risen early to bathe, then returned to the Hotel Casino for a breakfast of oysters on ice. Pavel had approached her hesitantly, in two minds as to whether she were truly the person she resembled. That uncertainty was dismissed when the lady caught sight of him and pushed out the seat opposite her with a slippered foot. "Pavel, stop creeping around like a curate in a brothel and come and have some of these. You do like oysters, I hope. Very good with cider. Like Jack there." Pavel, who found them utterly repulsive, took a seat, lifted a shell to his lips, and tipped the slimy clot of flesh down his throat, with a shudder that he masked with a cough. His companion skewered two of the helpless animals with a small steel fork, put them in her mouth, and chewed vigorously. She stared at her with fascination. All of this lady's sensible qualities had suffered, as it were, a sea change. The rice powder on her face had been washed away to reveal the healthy pink complexion of the enthusiastic smoker, dusted, as the saying goes, with freckles. The barbaric chignon in her hair had been detached, and the copper curls that had erupted from her temples in complex coils and plaits like the mechanism of an exploded clock, had been brushed into loose tresses and covered with a red fisherman's beret. Even the citric green of her eyes had taken on a bluish hue in the late morning sunshine. In short, she looked almost real. Would you like my daguerreotype? No, it's just that you're looking very lovely. Right, well, have you sent for your luggage? Yes, of course, it's just, they're laying on a coach in an hour, so if you want to ride to the station, you better be ready. Yes, that shouldn't be, yeah. Madame Patisi took a moment from her bivalvular victims to look at him with a closer attention. You're not having any doubts, are you? No, not at all, he protested. Truthfully enough, since he had no idea what she was talking about. Oh, good. Good. I think it could go down a storm. It's just the right subject. Abuse of power, the oppression of women and so on. And you've got a really good heroine. Actresses will love you for that role. And as you say, it's already been tested. There's the question of your French, of course. Now, don't take this the wrong way, my love. It's fine for selling pine trees in Nantes or whatever it is you get up to, but it'll hardly do for the Théâtre de Genre in Paris. And that's where we have to show it, a good second-class place, somewhere where they don't mind risking something a bit different. Pavel finally understood what this conversation had for a subject. He undid his collar stud, then looked around the crockery and glassware on the table for some water. Finding none, he poured himself a glass of cider, and wondered whether he might be sick, and if so, what procedure one followed in a French tourist resort. In Poland, you simply staggered out to the nearest linen. In Hungary, the custom was to lean to one's left, say, and fire away, leaving the tavern dog to clear up the results. In southern Germany, drinkers were expected to beg a bucket from the barman, whereas in the north, one brought a copper Kopsheimer of one's own. Norwegians used their hats, which they fitted with a prophylactic lining of waxed paper, whereas the Swedes, with their infectious sense of fun, surreptitiously borrowed those of their friends, thereby adding interest to leave-taking ceremonies. In the more refined parts of France, he guessed, the custom was to use one of those newfangled water closets. He made a mental note. Are you feeling all right? Madame Patisi asked. Pavel tore himself away from his private thoughts. You know I have no lodgings in Paris. Well, as I said, you can put up with me, so I can put up with you. Just while you write it out, yeah? Matter of 2 weeks, have a thought? Don't we see what we've got? Oh, all right, have you got enough space? Well, hard to make the offer if I didn't. Well, how much does it cost to stage a play? Said Pavel, hooking a finger into his cravat. About 150,000 francs. I think you put in about 10,000, we should be okay. Pavel, who had just taken a pull of his cider, narrowly avoided launching it at his partner's face. Instead, he swallowed hard and stared at the impeccable white napery before him with unfocused eyes. It seemed he was to be ruined all over again for one night of love. It was like being in a Hoffman tale or an Edgar Allan Poe. One of those stories where an innocent man is hunted to madness by the inscrutable malice of fate, or in his case, of women. Well, say something. You didn't dress yourself in drunken courage, I hope. Yes, of course, Pavel said as he looked up and smiled a ghastly smile. I'm most enthusiastic. Excellent. You know, I can't remember the last time I said this, but I'm actually quite excited. And she took him by the ears, pulled his head forward, and gave him a long, oystery kiss. For a moment, Pavel's countenance assumed a bit of a beatific expression, as he gazed into Madame Patisi's dilated pupils. Then he excused himself and disappeared with a stiff-legged trot in the direction of the WC's.